you don't have to have any prior experience in something in order to be good at it or in order to be productive. You just have to visualize and you have to observe. So observe some of the best at what they do and visualize yourself actually attaining that goal.
Welcome to the Physician Pharmacist podcast, a show designed to shed some light on a very unusual pathway into medicine. I'm your host, Nathan Gartland, and I'm a licensed pharmacist and fourth-year medical student. I'm also the author of PharmD to MD and the owner of the Physician Pharmacist Company. As this podcast has grown, we've had the tremendous opportunity to broaden our scope and explore other non-traditional healthcare careers. Tune in to hear from our non-traditional experts serving at the frontier of medicine, technology, and innovation. Today, I have the pleasure of speaking with Tim Mikhelashvili, who is a current Chief Executive Officer and co-founder of Amedea Pharma, which is an analytical management consulting company dedicated to healthcare quality, continuity, and innovation. His company is actively transforming the culture of performance metrics by incorporating data analytics along with some sportsmanship-like competition. Prior to starting Amedea Pharma, Tim received his PharmD from Xavier College of Pharmacy in 2004, after which he has amassed 18 years worth of experience in the pharmaceutical industry and has worked with major companies, including the roles at Sanofi and Astra Zeneca. Hey, Tim, welcome to the podcast today. I really appreciate your time and I'm looking forward to a really good episode.
Likewise, Nathan. Thanks for the invitation. I'm looking forward to the conversation here.
So let's talk a little bit about your career and how you got to this point.
I started as a pharmacist in New Orleans, Xavier College of Pharmacy, as you mentioned in the introduction. And at that time when I was graduating, I had seen a lot of medical problems and medications that were recalled after they came onto the market. And I decided to make a contribution in order to help bring safer and more effective products to patients. Had a medical science liaison who was dean at the College of Pharmacy, who had talked about careers in the industry, and really connected with him. They even started a new rotation in the industry outside of our network in New Orleans, where there weren't that many opportunities for pharmacists who wanted to pursue careers in the industry. So I traveled to Chicago, Waukegan, Illinois, and Abbott, and that's how my career began in the pharmaceutical industry. And so by now I've spent 18 years working in 7 different pharma companies, started with larger ones, very well-known global giants such as AstraZeneca, Sanofi, Aventis, before moving towards more rare specialty disease companies, ones that became the largest GI companies in the world, as well as others where I had some experiences where, despite having the best product, they failed. And so once I realized that I amassed enough types of trials and tribulations and lessons learned, I decided to start my company, Amedea Pharma, in order to address some of my personal interests as well as those kinds of gaps and deficits and opportunities that I had seen. For my entire career, I've had the pleasure, I do have to tell you, and the fortune of developing relationships with some of the most well-known scientific leaders, scientists across the globe, based in New York. And so I'm, because of my personal interest as well in sports and in sports analytics and distinguishing champions and what, experiences, what ratings distinguish those who are most valuable players versus others, for example. I sometimes think of myself as a pharmacist who thinks like a sports athlete and like a scientist without being a professional sports athlete or a bench scientist myself. But nevertheless, that's the way I've approached work, and I've seen other teams as well perform very well and engage with others as well.
And so that's really cool. So you obviously worked through the pharma industry, gained all this experience, and obviously learned a lot in that process. And subsequently, you decided, I've taken enough away from this. I've learned all these different lessons, what's worked and what hasn't. And you thought to yourself, I'm going to go start my own pharmaceutical company. And that introduces Amedea Pharma. So you kind of talked about why you wanted to do this, but what does Amedea do, and what is like the purpose that it serves?
Sure. So I had observed throughout my career in the industry that most of my colleagues or peers always knew their purpose of doing no harm, that Hippocratic oath, and improving healthcare quality through their work. However, I have never met someone who was excited about how they were evaluated, about metrics, because they're either irrelevant in terms of how they're evaluated, incomplete, or they're not accurate they don't represent our activities or our contributions as medical professionals or medical affairs professionals, where I've spent my entire career, in a way that's consistent with reality. And so, and that's where that kind of sports mentality comes in, right? Years before I knew what a medical liaison was or what medical affairs was in pharmaceutical industry, for example, I had researched a quarterback rating, how that was calculated myself before the days of the internet, even,
Hmm.
Nathan. And I had received a response explaining that metric from the NFL via fax, believe it or not even email. And so these were some of my interests to understand whether or not that quarterback rating really really characterizes a champion, right? The most valuable, addition to a team.
Hmm.
And so I wanted to create some certainty and introduce more objectivity to evaluate medical professionals that inspired them as well, inspired them to do better. And so essentially, Amedea Pharma is a type of an analytics company that that allows medical professionals and teams to simplify and quantify their contributions in a way that all of their stakeholders will relate to their own benefit, or will respond to in a timely manner. Because that's really been one of the biggest challenges that I've always come across, even with friends and colleagues who, let's say, knew the capacity of my work or our department, our medical department, and that was how to really be understood or relevant within your organization, right? So, and that's part of the frustration that I think is shared. Most of what we do in medical is abstract; it's qualitative, right?
Hmm.
And but yet, what I learned getting into the industry from academia, right, or from my training, was that you need to demonstrate some level of contribution to the business outcomes of your organization or to the organizational success.
Hmm.
We do not promote products in medical, but yet we're part of an organization that is there to be profitable. It's a business, right? And that's the reality. And nowadays we live in a reality where everything that we do is more exposed to data than ever before. So
Hmm.
I think it's much more timely now than ever before to know what data to use, and in order to be able to quantify your ultimate contribution, which every single person wants to know, regardless of how metrics are presented by the leader in that organization. You always want to know what you contribute to the success of it, or what your team contributes. But because that's been very much qualitative and not empiric, not scientific, because of how busy we all are in medical, that has left medical affairs professionals misunderstood. And so it's really a model that I've built, a very intricate system that requires some time early on to plan and to execute it, but it saves a lot of time downstream afterwards, and it provides a lot more more accurate type of a feedback mechanism,
Hmm.
negative feedback mechanism, such that you're more inspired to report not only the positive outcomes, but also the negative outcomes, in order to learn how to avoid them, or how to scale those activities with the highest impact in order to reproduce those masterpieces that are desired, if you will.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think that's really interesting too. You kind of talk about what, adding this internal layer of competition and just like analysis
Mhm.
can allow a company to improve their performance or whatever kind of like goals they're trying to achieve. And so you mentioned a
Mhm.
little bit is that physicians are obviously external motivation is obviously patient well-being, but
Yeah.
it sounds like you're trying to also implement internal motivation inside the company structure to basically allow them to, you know, kind of build this competition like environment that allows them to compare themselves to others and then motivate themselves to kind of perform better, which will then ultimately snowball into even better patient outcomes down the road. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I wanted to provide a more holistic view of performance, which requires you to really break performance down into all its individual parts, into activities and outcomes, and also be able to value sportsmanship and performance equally. In sports, for example, your ultimate results are viewed in the same way by spectators and by competitors alike. right? There's no misunderstanding there, right? Because you use, let's say, a stopwatch in a 100-meter dash. But unfortunately, the reality of a lot of functions in which that are not directly linked to revenue, such as medical affairs, often leaders tell their team members, look, don't worry about metrics. We don't want more pressure. Just go out there and meet with scientists in your territory, right? But at the end of the year, they're approached by sales leaders or VPs who tell them, well, what does your medical team do anyway? And I've come across this even 18 years of people who work very well closely with me, right? They didn't know what we did. I want those numbers. I want how many people do they meet with? Now, when you think about it, does how many people you meet with really relate to outcomes, corporate outcomes or medical outcomes? Not always. It's really about the insights that you bring that ultimately lead you to, let's say, change the strategy of your leadership to conduct a new study to see whether or not a particular medication's mechanism works in adults, not only in pediatric patients, for example, or design a head-to-head study against a larger company, which was the case in that startup that I worked, which took us 2 years to convince our leadership, for example, right? So that's the value, and it's qualitative, right? But nevertheless, then what happens is the medical affairs leader goes back to the team members and tells them, okay, we have to come up with the data. So you scramble, but because you didn't tell people that they had entered a race, you had told your team members that, look, go out and practice and play. But then apparently they had entered a race because they were practicing the whole time before. The data doesn't have integrity in terms of how it is captured, in terms of activities and outcomes. And so the data that then medical provides back to sales leadership or cross-functional leadership lacks quality, lacks integrity because of that. The other objection I often get is that metrics and outcomes are the same, are equal. And that's not correct. The way we define metrics is metrics express a relationship between activities and outcome. It's an estimate. It's an estimate of the relationship between activities and outcomes, which you constantly have to dial up or dial down or change and modify.
Of course. Yeah, there's that famous saying, I'm trying to think of who said it, but I think it was like Peter Drucker said it, and it's what gets measured gets managed, and what gets managed gets improved. And it sounds like you're trying to improve and kind of buff the integrity of the data that you're collecting and kind of putting, associated meaning to that particular data, so that the outcomes that we do conclude from said data are obviously, the truest possible outcomes we can obtain. And so with all of this in mind, I want to hear a little bit more about like what kind of clients are you specifically looking for Amedea? So like which companies are like your target niche for companies that you're trying to improve?
Sure. So the model is unique and it's universal enough where it provides you an opportunity to communicate both the patient experience and the employee experience in whichever way you define each. Because if you're a medical organization, if you're a pharma company, biotech company, or a healthcare system, chances are you're trying to provide an index or you have accountability for both the patient outcomes, right? Healthcare quality, patient satisfaction, or patient experience, or HCP experience, healthcare professional experience, if you like, right? And employee experience. Employee experience for a healthcare system may be physician retention, for example, right? And for pharma and for biotech organizations, that may be internal operations, internal communication. And so much too often we isolate, we separate performance metrics from behaviors, from culture. And so what we are trying to do is we're trying to help those types of leaders within either healthcare, pharma, or biotech organizations to actually provide a more holistic, more realistic picture of performance, right? Because if you're only measuring mostly externally facing outcomes, which most companies do, right? In pharma, biotech, they're busy. They want to make sure that their customers are happy, right? But if you're not really if you're not monitoring or managing, like you said in that quote, how likely, let's say, direct reports are to communicate with their peers from other functions, from sales, from marketing, whose outcomes are also directly impacted by medical. If you're not constantly managing, and if you're not seeing how the communication or the network map really is structured in your organization, up, down, and across the organization, then chances are, if somebody's not as likely to respond to your email, you may not be as likely to perform well, right? You may not get the results that you need. So you have to distribute accountability internally and externally equally, and also between performance and behavior to the equal extent, which is the only formula in which you can improve both performance and communication internally. And so medical affairs, is where I've worked, as I mentioned. But I have a tremendous commitment to healthcare quality, and because I've become more of an entrepreneur in the last 5 or 6 years, I'm looking to also work with research and development, clinical research organizations as well, who want to increase patient engagement, patient enrollment in clinical studies, which is a very important issue. Patients very often, even after they have been a participant in a clinical study, they're not often followed up with by even the study sponsor to make sure that they know that what the results of that study is, or to even thank patients for participating, right? And so there's a lot of very nuances that you could measure, and but it's just how do you weigh which activities?
Wow. I think that's incredible. And you've kind of covered the basis of, why you started Amedea, what kind of features that you guys offer, and, the clientele that you like, the goals at which you try to serve. So I'm curious to know, from your perspective, having worked with a various degree of companies and startups, why do you think like the top level leadership and like the systems and structures they have at these companies are lacking this particular, service that you're providing? Like, why is it so difficult to incorporate these features that you've discussed?
You would think that really it's idealistic and it's simple, but there's a lot of pressure, and this pressure is increasing. And medical leaders in particular, who have, let's say, national quality measures in hospitals, and who also depend on payments, right, for services, value-based care versus fee-for-services, in a system in which healthcare utilization has increased. In the United States, the healthcare utilization makes up 1/5 of the entire GDP, which is twice that of any other country in the world. You can probably appreciate why it is that they feel that pressure, because the quality of care in the United States is pretty much in line. It's not that much higher than anywhere else. And we're in the United States, we're in a more of a rescue type of therapy type of system, where the acute care is where a lot of the resources go into, and where a lot of the higher quality of care is seen. However, if you spend a little bit more, resources on preventive care, of course, which is what CMS is doing, and which a lot of payers are guiding other stakeholders to do, you're able to save costs. But the balance is between the innovation and the investment into medical and the costs, right? And so in medical, for medical organizations, it's particularly difficult to take the time and to even allocate budget to operations, advanced analytics, to bioinformatics. And that's what allows you to be more introspective, Nathan. And this is why, just in terms of the workflow, that workflow is changing because of shortages in healthcare, macro geopolitical issues, medical affairs organizations, for example, in pharma and biotech. The investment in medical has decreased in relation to sales or performance of pharma companies significantly. And this is some latest data from an Astellas VP of Medical Affairs from last year from Financial Times conference. And so these trends are also calling for more scrutiny in terms of the value. Communicating the value of medical organizations, whether in pharma, biotech, or healthcare, has never been greater. And so you need to provide a way to quantify even the most qualitative, abstract things that we do, in order for it to have a little bit more meaning. Similar to, let's say, in a similar way that we design clinical studies, right, in which we measure something as abstract as pain using a visual analog score.
Hmm.
or healthcare quality measures, let's say questionnaires over there that are 36 questions that become validated over time, and they become recognized by the FDA, right? But we don't take the same rigor into measuring our own internal operations or using technology, let's say. But it takes more management type of change management, organizational change leadership to understand how systems can communicate a little bit better internally throughout their internally as well as just across the system, for example, to make care a little bit more interoperable as well, so
Hmm.
that as you go from one hospital to another, from one physician, whether or not you have lost a job, whether or not you're retired, you can expect the same quality of care.
Yeah, of
Yeah.
course. I think that's really interesting too. And kind of building off of what you were saying, where we're in this kind of sphere now of healthcare where there's so much data around us. What roles do you think like machine learning and AI is going to have in kind of assisting us kind of aggregate this data and then interpret said data?
First of all, I think that AI and machine learning uh, are not going to replace humans or physicians, but it's going to replace physicians who do not know how to use AI and ML. So I've heard that quote before, Nathan, and I agree with it. I'm a person who's investigated this, who was a skeptic at some point. I do have to admit, okay. And there's also two people that I compete against. I sometimes joke recently, which is the first is myself to do it better every time, but also I compete against technology in some way myself in order to train my own independent thinking, in order not to be dependent, let's say. However, having said that, I do concede that if when used appropriately, uh, there's so many uses of AI to increase the speed of our efficiency and to improve our workflow. And ultimately, Amedea Pharma, is an agency that wants to design a new ways of working, and I think AI and ML are allowing us to write better, have a faster access to larger volumes of data, you know, and ultimately change our workflow so that we spend less time in, let's say, searching the right data, but we spend more time using our own analytical training or our background, our technical knowledge to analyze more data at once in one given time.
Hmm.
So it helps us basically with the magnitude of data to improve our decisions based on more data at one given time. Because look, publications are increasing, doubling. Medical publications are doubling now every 73 days. So it's very difficult to, no matter how talented you are as a physician or as a pharmacist, to analyze all of those volumes of data, right? So you need to find a way to analyze it. I mean, the uses that I'm particularly excited about, in addition to writing and pharmacovigilance and safety, since I started talking about kind of some of those medications that were recalled for safety uses, which was a problem that I had seen when I was graduating in pharmacy school and that I wanted
Hmm.
to change, right? So in order to understand the post-marketing surveillance, all the real-world evidence, which sometimes is different from clinical trial evidence, and AI can help analyze much more data. Uh, the other big one is really drug discovery, because drug development is very expensive for companies,
Hmm.
and you can now use generative AI models that pit two software programs against each other. One that basically identifies different molecules, and the other one that generates them in order with the goal of tricking that other program, but it does it at scale and faster and provides you more drug candidates, basically druggable products, uh, in per given time than the current private or public databases of drug target molecules and drug target interactions provide to the pharmaceutical industry. And so, but I mean, in silico medicine is one great example of a company that has used AI in order to develop a medication, for which probably you've heard of, for idiopathic pulmonary fibrosis, which was completely, fully developed by AI. It saved a lot. It needed only 10 times less people for that company, and I think 10 or 100-fold less uh, budget as well.
Wow.
Um,
So I'm really excited to see where AI kind of takes this whole sphere of the industry. And it sounds like it's
mhm.
just kind of taking hold now, but the impact of having this integration is going to be massive down the line. And
Yeah.
ultimately, we're going to have better drugs with, less waste of resources, more streamlined approach to the systems, and obviously better patient outcomes because of, more opportunities to treat their pathologies that are coming out. So it's really
Yeah.
cool to see where, all this technology is going to drive the healthcare industry as a whole. And
Yeah.
so, what does your daily life look like as the CEO of your company?
Sure. So I've certainly adopted a new workflow, I can tell you. So as a CEO, particularly of an agency that is producing a immune disease product together, co-developing one with another company where I serve, called Stadia Bio, by the way. Um, where I serve as a business development, in more of a business development role. Yet Amedea Pharma is co-developing this product, which is a STAT3 SHE2 specific inhibitor with some compelling data in ulcerative colitis, and currently being studied by the FDA for being investigated being investigated and will be submitted to the FDA this month for various different rare diseases as well. So that takes some time. Then that takes me away from Amedea Pharma. But with Amedea Pharma, every day is very different. We're finalizing the technological development of this digital solution that essentially has three components: quantifying the activities and outcomes, generating external feedback continuously from HCPs or patients, and the third component is internal feedback and evaluations that are captured. And a composite of those three is what we call the medical prophetic productivity index. And so a lot of that, the work, the formulas, the intricate, the secret sauce, if you will, is something that I worked on a technical level with the developers that I have from South Africa. I just recently hired a chief growth officer who has extensive experience in Canada and Europe and healthcare systems there. Has also a cybersecurity and background, also development background, and he's helping me commercialize this with the vice presidents of medical affairs, the chief medical officers of companies, medical excellence, as well as CROs, as I mentioned, and R&D companies and health systems as well.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also I just wanted to add to that too. When we first connected, obviously you're staying very busy as the CEO of this company, so never a dull day, I can imagine. But when we first
Right.
connected, you also mentioned that you had worked with a prior guest who was on episode 28, Dr. Yair Saperstein, who was a finalist and award winner in Amedea Pharma's Global Annual Innovation Olympics. Do you mind telling us a little bit more about what this event entails?
Yeah. So it's a demonstration of how physicians, scientists, and innovators across life sciences can compete, can learn from Olympic champions, can receive feedback constantly, which we're not as used to as, let's say, a typical sales organization would be. And so it's really demonstrated a very unique format of an ideation competition, that's in multiple stages, Olympic style competition that created this Olympic village, the spirit of an Olympic village as well, where we had Yair, who was one of our champions in our event categories, and leaders who competed. We've had large giants in pharma such as Astellas, Takeda, and Roche submit their ideas aimed at improving the access, continuity, and quality of healthcare across various different categories. And so ultimately, this is the third year in which I'm helping organize this event. We have a steering committee that was formed itself by popular demand from the speakers and from the judges, expert judges in the field, with our interest in growing its awareness worldwide, and in helping connect also investors, leaders in the industry to some of the best ideas and best solutions in healthcare. And so investors, reaching out to investors is something that I'm starting to do as well right now. And I'm learning from that experience as well from my chief growth officer. But in this event called Medical Affairs Innovation Olympics, we also have the trials that are now open. Well, you'll have Olympic gold medalists that are already confirmed, who will speak as well, patient advocates. It will take place October 1st through October 16th later on this year. So you can see all of that information at Amedea Pharma on my website.
Really cool. So it sounds like there's tons
Yeah.
of opportunities for like young innovators to get involved into the
Yep.
space and kind of share their
Yeah.
ideas with obviously a vetted population of individuals who has a vast amount of experience in those particular fields to kind of get feedback on how to improve, what they're missing, what they should be looking at, and things along those lines. So it sounds like it's almost like a little boot camp where you will go through this process and come out so much stronger, like some of these Olympic medalists and finalists.
Yeah.
So that's really
Xavier
cool.
is a great success story, by the way. Xavier, I know he's grown his company, ever since 2022, since that event as well. And
I believe when he was talking on the podcast, he had mentioned that he had raised already $5 million in seed funding, and so they're actually getting ready for their next round of funding to go from there. So it's really interesting to see, like, just this experience that he had working with you, and now it's blossomed and grown even further. So it's really cool to see that. Cool. So we are getting close to the end of our interview today, and I think it's time for our famous 3 questions. And these are the same 3 questions we ask every individual who comes on the show. And so the first question is going to be, how do you maintain a work-life balance in your demanding profession? And do you have any last-minute tips or tricks that individuals can do to achieve that same balance?
Sure. So I was actually very serious when I said that I think like an athlete and a scientist without being a bench scientist or an athlete. So I think these 2 mindsets are the most productive mindsets in any organization. Or in any business, regardless of whether or not you have any interest in sports or any background training or science, for those who listen. Okay, so visualization. You don't have to have any prior experience in order to be good at it or in order to be productive. You just have to visualize and you have to observe. So observe some of the best at what they do, and visualize yourself actually attaining that goal, but give yourself a deadline. All right. What I've learned from interviewing Olympic gold medalists, Olympians, is that they compete against themselves. Okay. But it's not until they start to increase the challenge of the competitions that they enter, meaning it's not until they really compete against more people and more often that they really reach that level of greatness. Okay. So the paradox in performance is that, yes, always compete against yourself, but compete against yourself when you compete against more people and enter more competitions. If you can somehow do that by just give yourself a challenge, even if it's a 1 or 5% improvement, right, in terms of the outcomes. But at the same time, what we can learn from sports athletes is the importance of recovery. So you mentioned some of the tricks or some of the things that I do. It's really to stay fit and not be always sedentary. Try to connect socially, emotionally with more people. Right, networking is not something that I used to do very well, Nathan, early on in my career, because I had I had goals for myself to reach a particular role, for example, or find a job. But it's more than just finding a job. Or it's about having, forming a career and finding meaning in it, because best careers are not the ones necessarily that are linear or that are vertical, right? They may be non-linear, but challenge yourself to move more physically. You're much better at it at whatever it is you do when you actually go away from it for a while. When you're in movement, right? So sports athletes know the value of recovery and recharging. Okay. And that's what I've learned from the Olympians. And we don't do that in business. Our recovery is much shorter than their work. So try to integrate some movement into your routine and really give the attention to the people that are important in your life, because no matter how much we glorify work is not everything that we do. Right. If you can just take your own personality, who you are, what is important to you, across the work-life continuum, you'll be that much more successful. Even if it's not a vacation, make your days more dynamic throughout the day. Walk more, think, and connect socially as well with others. And compete more. Enter the competitions, accelerators, even if you don't win. Yeah. Such as mine as well, at the Innovation Olympics.
Yeah, I think that's interesting too. You're 100% right. Where you're competing against yourself, and you need to challenge yourself, and that's really important. And kind of keeping along with the sports analogy, I'm currently reading Atomic Habits, and they
Hmm.
stressed the importance of just getting 1% better in all these different
Right.
areas around whatever goal or like task you're trying to achieve. And if you get
Hmm.
1% better at all those different facets, it will add up substantially over time to lead to ultimate success. And so that's what the British cyclists were doing, keeping with the sports theme, where that's
Hmm.
how they turned their industry, from cycling, from being like a very abysmal, like not very strong cycling like group, into some of the best in the world. So the book kind of goes into that as well. So I thought that's just kind of an
Yeah.
interesting parallel. And so
Yeah.
jumping to our second to last question, do you have any last minute recommendations for students or graduates, whether they be pharmacists or other non-traditional individuals in medicine or whatnot, who
Hmm.
are interested in pursuing a career similar to your own?
This is a competitive career and field. Don't be don't be misled by anyone, and it takes a long time to become an expert. And usually, the years of training needed to become a physician, uh, are quite challenging and long.
Hmm.
However, this is a timeless type of a profession, being in healthcare. And we've learned about that from COVID, from the pandemic, from the changing climate or environment. So, what really it concerns me is just some of the trends in people leaving this field. And I think that by what I would say to those who are entering this career is that look for sources of purpose, and look for people who will allow you to be yourselves in whatever specialty it is, and mentors. Um, it's not just the outcome, that should be the motivating factor for you, but it should be really, what it is, the play factor of what it is that you do. Right, if you find that you study yourself and your character, and if you enjoy treating patients or contributing to healthcare somehow, whether it's in technology, for example, right, to make sure that the right patient is identified, is screened for a particular rare disease on time, but yet you're still involved in healthcare, find a way to assist health, because the system needs you in healthcare more than ever before, and it will in the future as more diseases are identified and conditions, and we need to make care a little bit more simpler and more interoperable across institutions. So there are many more ways that you can get involved in healthcare, but it takes, ultimate, vision for you, and that will be dependent on the kinds of mentors and the kind of involuntary self-learning that you can get your hands on.
Of course. Yeah, you talk a lot about mentorship right there. And I can't really, I want to speak on the fact that mentorship is so, so important. And it's really interesting because actually a lot of individuals will end up choosing their medical specialty or their pathway in pharmacy based off of who their mentors were and who kind of inspired them to look down
Yeah.
that pathway. And
Yeah.
so, find a good mentor and latch on, because that makes all the difference when it comes to like the impressions you make on that particular industry and things along those lines. So I think that's really cool that you stress that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so our final question for today, what are your personal, professional, or business-oriented goals that you'd like to accomplish in the next 5 to 10 years?
I would say that my goals are to help spread the kinds of messages that will continue to inspire people, to inspire more people in my field and beyond. Innovators are in the business of inspiration, and you may think that inspiring someone doesn't necessarily lead to profits or revenue, for example, but it's really about, you're always one meeting, one podcast, one introduction away from reaching success that you visualize. So for me, it's really to try to magnify the the message that I believe in, uh, that sportsmanship is something that's healthy. Competition needs to be explicit instead of implicit. When it's implicit, it leads to dysfunction, interdepartmental rivalries that are unnecessary, and lack of objectivity. So utilize the technology that you have in a way to be more objective with your decisions. more accountable, more radically transparent. My goal is to reach as many different organizations as possible in healthcare and beyond, in order for them to be more transparent, deliver more impact, more positive impact on their environment, on society. So for Amedea Pharma, it's really to improve the quality of healthcare here, and really with my mission, the goals are to change how we break down and view performance in healthcare and beyond, and how we interweave our behaviors and hold each other accountable. Compete and collaborate, which is possible when you recognize people more often, even if they don't deliver revenue to you directly, but they end up helping entire organization be successful. And so I want to help kind of design the types of contests that matter in life over the long term, in this game of business, if you will.
Fantastic. Well, we've come to the end of our interview today, and I'd like to thank all of our listeners for the support. If you have any additional questions about the medical school journey, pharmacy industry careers, or other non-traditional career paths, check out my website at www.physicianpharmacist.com. Before we let you go, Tim, how can our listeners get in touch with you or learn more about you?
Sure. So I'm very active on LinkedIn. So you can follow me on LinkedIn, Tim Mikhelashvili. You can go on my website, which I update very regularly, amedeapharma.com, and also listen to the All Out Coach podcast as well. I'm a huge fan of your podcast, Nathan, and I would love to interview you as well on mine. But please see some of the leaders in medicine and mentors and Olympic champions. Hear some of their stories as well on All Out Coach, all one word as well.
Fantastic. And all that will be linked in the show notes below. All right, Tim, thank you so much for being on the show again. Really do appreciate your time, and best of luck with everything.
It's been a huge pleasure, Nathan. Very nice meeting you.
All righty. Take care.